Keanu Reeves has lived most of his adult life inside a strange kind of myth. The internet's boyfriend, the saint who never complains, the man photographed alone on a park bench and turned within days into a punchline the entire world could laugh at, without ever asking why he actually looked that way. Now a single photograph of Alexandra Grant with a new hairstyle is making the same rounds, generating the same breathless headlines, the same manufactured excitement over nothing, as if the most interesting thing about a working artist in her 50s could ever really be the length of her hair. But underneath both of those moments, the meme and the haircut, sits a story almost nobody bothered to tell properly. This isn't a story about hair. It's a story about how easily the world turns real people into content, and about two people who quietly refused to let that happen to what actually mattered between them. The mask the internet built without asking him. In January of 2010, a paparazzo photographed Keanu Reeves sitting alone on a park bench in Los Angeles, eating a sandwich, staring somewhere past the camera with an expression the internet decided almost instantly meant something devastating. Within days, it had a name: Sad Keanu. The image spread everywhere, endlessly remixed into fake movie posters and greeting cards and photoshopped into famous paintings, mocked with a kind of casual cruelty that never once considered the actual person sitting on that bench. Nobody paused to ask what he might genuinely have been carrying that day, nearly a decade after burying a daughter, a partner, and a close friend, while still checking in on a sister who had only recently come out of a 10-year fight with cancer. Nobody wondered whether a man eating lunch by himself was simply a man eating lunch by himself, or something heavier. The joke didn't require an answer. It only required an image, stripped entirely of context, ready to be laughed at by millions of strangers who knew nothing real about him. Reeves himself has rarely addressed the meme directly, which is, in its own way, exactly the point. Even at the height of a joke built entirely around his supposed sadness, he never once used it as an opportunity to correct the record, explain himself, or ask for sympathy. That's the part of Keanu Reeves's fame that rarely gets discussed alongside the affectionate nicknames and the wholesome internet folklore. For years, the world has been perfectly comfortable turning his private moments into entertainment without ever once asking what those moments actually cost him. The losses that built the man before anyone was laughing. To understand what that park bench photograph actually missed, you have to go back further, to a pattern of grief that started decades earlier and never fully let go of him. In 1991, Reeves co-starred with a young actor named River Phoenix in the independent drama My Own Private Idaho, and the two became genuinely close off-camera, the kind of friendship built on trust rather than publicity. 2 years later, in October of 1993, Phoenix died outside a Los Angeles nightclub at just 23 years old. Reeves was, by every account, devastated. Almost immediately afterward, he went straight into production on Speed, playing a police officer racing to save a bus full of strangers from a bomb rigged to detonate below 50 miles an hour. And people who worked alongside him on that set have described an actor pouring an almost frightening level of intensity into the physical demands of the role, as if the sheer forward motion of the film was the only thing keeping him upright. He never discussed Phoenix publicly. He simply worked, and the film became one of the defining hits of his career. Its star's calm, controlled performance masking a grief almost no one watching in theaters that summer had any idea he was carrying. The next blow arrived at what should have been the highest point of his professional life. In the final weeks of 1999, only months after The Matrix turned him into one of the most recognizable actors on the planet, Reeves and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Syme, lost their daughter. Ava was stillborn late in the pregnancy, a loss with no adequate language attached to it, and the relationship between Reeves and Syme, already strained by grief neither of them had any real way to process, didn't survive what followed. Then, less than a year and a half later, in April of 2001, Jennifer Syme was killed in a car accident after leaving a party. Reeves reportedly paused preparations for the enormous, effects-heavy productions of The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions to fly back and be there for her family, and by multiple accounts, he served as one of the pallbearers at her funeral, carrying her casket himself. Within 18 months, he had lost a daughter before she'd taken a breath, and the woman he'd built a family with, all while two of the most anticipated sequels in modern film history were waiting for him to show back up and perform under some of the heaviest technical demands of his entire career. He showed up anyway. Colleagues from that period have said he carried the loss silently, professionally, without ever asking the production to slow down for him. And running beneath both of those tragedies was a third, quieter one that stretched across an entire decade. Reeves's younger sister, Kim, was diagnosed with leukemia in 1991, and she fought the disease for roughly 10 years before finally reaching remission. The two of them had grown up close in an unusually unsettled childhood, moving as kids through Hawaii, Australia, New York, and Canada as a family that rarely stayed anywhere very long. And that early closeness never faded. During some of the busiest, highest-earning years of his career, right as The Matrix was turning him into a global star, Reeves became her primary caregiver in every practical sense, selling his own home so he could live closer to her, cooking her meals, cleaning her house, managing her medication schedule, doing for her exactly what she'd always done for him growing up. He later set up a private charitable foundation supporting children's hospitals and cancer research, deliberately declining to attach his own name or celebrity to it, running it quietly for years before he ever acknowledged its existence publicly. Years afterward, when a journalist finally coaxed an acknowledgement out of him, all he offered was a single, modest sentence, that he had a private foundation running for 5 or 6 years, helping a couple of children's hospitals, and funding cancer research. He said of Kim simply that she was always there for him, and that he would always be there for her. He never once framed any of it as sacrifice. It was just what you do for someone you love. That's the man behind the sandwich on the park bench, not a punchline. A man who had already buried a close friend, a daughter he never got to raise, and the mother of that daughter, while simultaneously spending a decade keeping his own sister alive, all without a single public complaint. It's part of why, years later, he could bring such a specific, lived-in devastation to a role like John Wick, a former assassin whose entire identity collapses the moment he loses his wife, a character built almost entirely on the difference between performing composure and actually living inside it. Reeves gave an interview back in 2006, long before Wick ever existed, where he was asked plainly whether loss had changed him. He didn't reach for anything poetic. He said, "Grief changes shape, but it never actually ends." And that people who believe you can simply process it and move on completely are wrong. In that same conversation, he admitted with visible frustration how unfair the whole experience of losing people felt, before adding that all you can really hope for is that grief eventually transforms into something closer to memory and solace than raw loss. That sentence became, more than a decade later, the emotional architecture of one of the most successful action franchises in modern cinema, because it wasn't a performance of grief. It was testimony. Finding stillness without knowing the cost. By the time Keanu Reeves met Alexandra Grant in the late 2000s, he had already survived more loss than most people carry across an entire lifetime. Grant, a visual artist working well outside the machinery of Hollywood, wasn't chasing fame or trying to attach herself to a franchise star. The two crossed paths socially and simply became friends first, creative collaborators years before they were anything else, eventually co-publishing 2 books together, Ode to Happiness and later Shadows, projects built entirely on shared ideas rather than red carpets, Grant illustrating while Reeves wrote, the two of them working side by side on something that had nothing to do with either of their public profiles. That stretch of pure friendship gave Grant years, not weeks, to understand exactly who she was dealing with. A man who had buried a friend, a daughter, and the mother of that daughter, who had spent a decade quietly caring for a dying sister, all without ever once turning any of it into a public performance of pain. There was no pressure attached to a friendship like that, no expectation, no spotlight demanding either of them explain themselves. Just two people slowly discovering they worked well together long before anyone called it romance. What people close to both of them have consistently pointed to isn't chemistry in the conventional Hollywood sense. It's something closer to relief. Reeves has always been more comfortable listening than performing, a man who has said outright that he simply reacts against anything that makes him feel less than free. Someone who has spent his career letting his work speak in place of long, revealing interviews. Grant, notably, has never needed him to fill a silence. She's an artist in her own right, established on her own terms, entirely uninterested in borrowing his fame to build her own profile, working in a world of galleries and installations that has nothing to do with box office numbers. Friends have described watching him become visibly lighter, quicker to laugh, more present in a room since the two of them became a couple. And Grant herself has said her own work took on a noticeably warmer quality once their relationship deepened, crediting the shift directly to him. Reeves described one ordinary morning with her, years into the relationship, as simply being in bed together, connected, smiling, laughing, feeling great, and called it, without embellishment, just really nice to be together. He's spoken with similar plainness about their motorcycle trips, saying only that the two of them had gone out a few times together and enjoyed it. The kind of understatement that, from a man who chooses his words this carefully, carries more weight than a paragraph of gushing ever could. That's the whole philosophy of what they built. Nothing engineered for an audience, just two people who happened to make each other lighter, when quiet was mistaken for a headline. The couple didn't formally step into public view until November of 2019, when they walked their first red carpet together at the LACMA Art and Film Gala in Los Angeles, ending nearly a decade of a relationship the public had no idea even existed. Grant has since recalled, almost with disbelief, how instantly the story exploded, that seemingly everyone she'd ever known called her within the first week just to talk about it, as though a single photograph had rewritten how the entire world understood her. It's a strange thing, watching two people who spent over a decade deliberately keeping something private suddenly become one of the most discussed couples on the internet overnight, simply for holding hands in front of a camera. True to form, neither of them chased what followed. They kept doing what they'd always done, taking motorcycle trips together, working on their own projects, occasionally correcting the record when the rumor mill got something wrong, and otherwise staying almost entirely out of a conversation they'd never asked to start. When the world finally noticed what was never hidden, that instinct to simply live their lives rather than manage a narrative was tested again in the fall of 2025, when a single photograph of the two of them kissing at Rodin Crater in Arizona sent the internet into a full wedding frenzy, congratulations pouring in before either of them had said a word. Grant addressed it directly, thanking everyone for the kindness, but clarifying plainly that no wedding had happened, that the photo was simply taken in an unguarded moment, right after she and Reeves had finished an interview together. "I'm sharing it here to say thank you to everyone for the congratulations on our wedding," she wrote. "Except we didn't get married." She added with a dry kind of humor that good news was badly needed these days, but that this particular story was still fake news, so people should be careful out there. Reeves, asked about it directly at a film premiere shortly after, handled it with the same easy warmth he brings to most personal questions, noting that all the kind messages people sent were lovely, even if the premise behind them wasn't true, and crediting Grant with handling the correction far more gracefully than most people manage. Neither of them seemed remotely bothered by the mistake, and it's worth sitting with why. A couple who spent over a decade being almost entirely ignored by the tabloids suddenly can't share a private kiss without it becoming a wedding announcement, and now can't get a haircut without it becoming a headline. The world went from barely noticing them to inventing entire narratives out of a single frame, and somehow never landed on the actual story in between. What survived when everything else was rumor, because the actual story was never about a haircut, or a kiss caught mid-frame, or a sandwich eaten alone on a bench 15 years ago. It was a man who lost a close friend in his 20s, a daughter and the mother of that daughter within 18 months of each other at the height of his fame, and who spent a full decade quietly keeping his own sister alive, all without ever asking the public for sympathy. It was a woman who never needed his fame, who gave him years of ordinary friendship before either of them called it anything else, and whose steadiness he has described in his own quiet way as simply feeling really nice to be around. Their relationship was never tested by public scrutiny the way some marriages are. It was tested decades before it even began, by death, by grief that changes shape but never actually leaves, and by a decade of caregiving that nobody photographed at all. That's what actually survived. Not a wedding that never happened, not a hairstyle. A man who learned the hardest possible way exactly how fragile happiness is, and a woman patient enough to let him find his way back to it without ever needing him to perform the recovery for anyone watching. It's worth remembering, too, that Reeves has spent decades being handed labels he never asked for. The Internet's boyfriend, the saint of Hollywood, the sad man on a bench who somehow became beloved for looking miserable in a paparazzi photo. He has never seemed particularly interested in correcting any of it. The same way, he's never seemed interested in explaining his relationship with Grant to anyone beyond a brief, warm sentence when directly asked. That consistency, saying almost nothing while somehow revealing everything that actually matters, through simple, repeated action over more than a decade, might be the closest thing to a real answer this story has to offer. A man who has buried a friend, a daughter, a partner, and nearly lost a sister, does not need to narrate his own healing for it to be real. He just has to keep showing up, quietly, for the people still in front of him, which, by every account, is exactly what he has done since the day he met her. So here's the real question worth sitting with. After everything Keanu Reeves has survived, a friend gone too soon, a daughter he never got to raise, a partner taken in an instant, a sister he fought for across 10 hard years, does it strike you as strange that the headlines keep circling back to something as small as a haircut or a kiss photo? Or is that exactly the point? That some people become so good at protecting what actually matters that the rest of the world is only ever left with the surface to talk about? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story changed the way you see either of them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.